right, good evening. It is great to see you here. My name is Alice Hunt. I'm president here at Chicago Theological Seminary. We are delighted that you are here. We are delighted with this great crowd. We welcome everyone who continues to come in and find a seat, and if we run out of seats, we'll put more chairs in here for you. We're delighted for your energy and your interest in this, our third of three in a lecture series, Perspectives on Muslim Theology. Uh-oh, I lost my notes. Sorry, just a moment. So we at Chicago Theological Seminary have been an institution since 1855. We're delighted to be here and doing this work together with you. We are affiliated with the United Church of Christ. We're a predominantly, although not exclusively, Christian institution. We have about 250 students. For about 30 years, we have recognized the critical importance of doing interreligious engagement work and the importance of religious leaders, if they're Christian, that they have an understanding of and a commitment to interreligious engagement. That's why we have our Center for Jewish Christian Islamic Studies here. And one of the things that happened with that center is that a couple years ago, we were privileged to bring Rabbi Dr. Rachel Mikva as a Herman Schulman Chair in Jewish Studies, and we are delighted now, I'm not seeing him right this moment, but that we're going to have Dr. Rami Nashashibi. Where are you? Oh, right in front of me here. While he continues as executive director of Iman, he's also going to be visiting scholar in Muslim studies and sociology here. In the fall, he's going to be teaching 2 classes, community organizing and American Muslim experience. And we are so thrilled to have Dr. Umar Abd-Allah, who's going to teach a class, Theology and the Muslim Worldview, this fall. You do not have to be a Chicago Theological Seminary student to take one of those classes. You can sign up as a special student. And if you will see Lisa Sywert, raise your hand, Lisa, she will make sure you are set up to take one of those classes if you want to do so. Most of all, I want to thank Dr. Abd-Allah and Dr. Jackson for being here tonight, for being in dialogue with us in conversation. Tonight's topic is good and evil. We are honored and privileged to have you with us. Welcome, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings be upon you all. I'm again tasked with the extraordinary and daunting challenge of having to introduce the 2 giants that we have here this evening. And before I do that, I should first perhaps start with, again, a word of extraordinary thanks to CTS, Rabbi Professor Dr. Rachel Mikva, who is running around frenetically and is the energy behind a lot of this. And of course, thank you so much to the President, Alice, for being here this evening, along with all the CTS students and faculty that have joined us. And for the larger Muslim community who've come out, CTS continues to try to be at, and is in fact, in many ways, a space that is engaging our communities in not simply fluffy, quote-unquote, interfaith dialogue, but real, meaningful, relevant conversations about how faith communities can engage on the pressing issues of our day. And this institution has had an extraordinary legacy of doing this for over 150 years on some of the most socially relevant issues of our time. And so it is very appropriate that we have the type of conversation that we are having here this evening. Dr. Umar, I think I would like to begin again with him. And you all have their information, and for some of the students here who are from CTS, I'll give you a little more background. But I started in my first session by citing a quote by Sheikh Hamza that was narrated to us by Ibu Butel, the Senate thing, who mentioned that Sheikh Hamza once said, and I think it's an appropriate quote for Dr. Umar, that it was a divine destiny that Dr. Umar, when he finally came back to America, ended up almost 15, 16 years ago, centered once again in the core of the Midwest. And if he had been on either coast, the continent would have shifted. that is the weight of this man, and that is the weight that I think for many of us he has been in our lives, whether academically, spiritually, socially. He is, as I mentioned in the first evening, for me, the perfect hadith is the invocation, the prophetic invocation. Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinak. He is that vision, I believe, that is embodied in that prophetic tradition of calling upon our Creator to keep us rooted in the tradition, to rooted in faith. And Dr. Umar, for so many of us in our community, is a person who has so profoundly taken on that task to keep us rooted. Aside from that, his conventional biography, which is in no way conventional, is the fact that he has authored some of the most extraordinary texts that have had a profound influence on many of us who have had a chance to read them, including recently over the last when on Oxford University Press, a Muslim in Victoria, America, The Life of Alexander Russell Webb, Malik and Medina, Islamic Legal Reasoning in the Formative Period on Brill. He has taught at a number of major institutions. He received his PhD at the University of Chicago, and he is currently still authoring many very important essays and continues to do his work in a number of capacities alongside Dr. Umar. And there's really more that you can read about him, but I don't want to belabor the introductions. But alongside Dr. Umar tonight, and we are very, very blessed and honored to have Dr. Sherman Jackson. Dr. Sherman Jackson is also someone that many people in this room are very, very familiar with in a number of capacities. Again, aside from being an extraordinary scholar of the highest caliber, both here and across the world, Dr. Sherman Jackson is a person that is regarded as one of our most treasured public intellectuals. There's perhaps not a weekend in this man's life that he is not in one center, school, institution across the country and across the world, engaging from the most grassroots storefront entities in the neighborhoods that he came from in South Philly to some of the most kind of affluent, prestigious neighborhoods across the country and across the world. Dr. Sherman Jackson is, again, very not only rooted in the tradition, but rooted in the commitment to how the tradition continues to be relevant to our communities. He is formerly currently the King Faisal Chair of Islamic Thought and Culture, a professor of religion and American studies and ethnicity at the University of Southern California. The whole thing that we said earlier about the coasts, I think Dr. Sherman Jackson assessed that, evaluated it, and felt that the Midwest was secure enough to go to the West Coast, and then perhaps that decision was made knowing that Dr. Umar would stay with us in Chicago. But as many of you know, that was a very momentous migration from a long-standing post at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor to USC. He has been the author of a number of articles and essays and a number of very important books, including On the Boundaries of Theological Tolerance in Islam, Islam in the Black American, Looking Towards the Third Resurrection, and Islam and the most recently in Islam and the Problem of Black Suffering. All of these on Oxford University Press. Again, both of these distinguished scholars are people that are sought out internationally from every quarters, and so we are extraordinarily blessed and honored to have them here with us this evening. Please join me in a warm welcome to Dr. Umar and Dr. Jackson.
الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. We begin in the name of God, the All-Merciful, the Compassionate. I want to extend my thanks to all of you for coming tonight and honoring us with your presence. And again, I want to express our thanks to CTS for being so gracious in hosting us and allowing this dialogue to be possible. Before I begin to talk about the concept of good and evil, I want to look back at where we were in the last two lectures. Many of the faces are new faces, and even for those who honored us by being here before, I think it might be valuable to revisit some of the important ideas. When we began 2 weeks ago, we drew attention to the reality of globalism in today's world, and the fact that the globalism today that we live with, it has brought together different peoples and different cultures across the world in a way that was never imaginable before. And in the first lecture, we noted that in 1893, there was the great Chicago's World's Fair here. Midway Plaisance was one of the hubs of that. There was, in fact, a beautiful Ottoman mosque that was just down here in the Plaisance. I've written about that in my book about Webb because he was there. He participated in it. The newspapers of Chicago were saying, "All the world is here!" exclamation point. And really that was a major event in American cultural history, and it is a pivotal time. And it is a prelude to the 20th century with its colonialism that would continue, and then other events, and then finally the globalism that would appear at the end of that century in the way that we are familiar with it today. And as we noted, the world is with us here and now in a way that was not conceivable in those times. It's actually at our fingertips with our iPads, our iPhones, and whatever we have. And one of the important lessons of history, especially of religious history, is that the human being is homo religiosus. The human being is religious by nature. Either he or she follows a religion or they follow a secular alternative to that. But their behavior is essentially religious, and they don't seem to ever escape that. If they give up universal principles, then they adopt ideals. And maybe they talk about utopias or other things. But when you mix people and you bring them together in the powerful way that that has been done in globalism, it has a powerful fermenting effect. And the history of religions pays a lot of attention to this. And people demand meaningful explanations, new ideas. Living religious traditions have got to respond, and they have to respond effectively, and whether they do or not, others will respond. Ideologies, neo-religions, and so forth. So this is an extremely important fact of the time that we live in, and therefore we, as Muslims, those who belong to other faith traditions, it is very important for us to be able to give explanations, not just descriptions and not just solutions, but to be able to explain to people who and why we are, what we believe in, and how it's meaningful in our time. And this is a theological task, and it is also a task of many other dimensions. We also spoke in that lecture about how, interestingly, the Muslim world's exposure to globalism actually estranged many of its intellectual elites from their own tradition. And in my view, this tradition remains extremely rich, and we need to be able to navigate it and to understand it. In the last lecture, we talked about diversity and toleration. And here I chose to speak about that from the standpoint of the laws of dhimma. This is a topic which is controversial. This is a topic to which many people today are allergic. And I think that we have to also be able to overcome these allergies. We cannot allow the universals that we believe in today to blind us about the past where they didn't function. When we talk about that world, it is not the world of the nation state that you know. It is not the world of international human rights. It is not a world that is even similar in many of its ways to that world. It's a world in which there was extermination of peoples. That was recognized as valid. There was slavery. There was war all the time, divine rights, and other things like that. So the laws of Dhimma have to be understood in that context. Many of the people that were in those Dhimma communities were people who belonged to communities that were at war with the state from the outside. We don't want to defend that. I don't find that extremely useful, but we need to be able to look at the past. And one of the things that we see in our own Western tradition is that when the epistemology of secularism begins to develop in the West, in the Renaissance, which is an extremely important topic, and is adopted then by the important and dominant elements of Western civilization, then the effect is that Renaissance man, as great as he and sometimes she might be, is alienated from their own roots. And the Middle Ages become the Dark Ages. And we know today that that's not really fair. That the Middle Ages had in it accomplishments and realities that must be taken seriously, but that Renaissance man could not understand. And so for that reason, if we do believe in a tradition, and continuity is very important in religious traditions, as is living community, then we need to be able to overcome these allergies. And we need to go back and to look at things and understand how they worked then and what they meant now, and not expect them to be substitutes for what we have today. The main point that I wanted to make, and this is really why I picked that topic, is again the reality of globalism. And that is that globalism has brought us all together, whether we like it or not. I happen to like it, and I'm sure that you do too. And globalism requires a dialogue between people, but usually it is not on equal terms. And although the doctrine of human rights and egalitarianism and pluralism and secular humanism believe in pluralism and diversity, in reality, they often undercut it. Even if we look at the quotation from John Rawls, who is one of the most respected of modern thinkers, he expects the truth claims of intolerant religions to wane. And that's very condescending. It may also be very unrealistic, but this is typical of the secular approach. And the thing that I was stressing is that if there is a lesson for us to learn from Dhimma, it is that different groups, different religions, different ideologies, they need to be allowed to speak on their terms, not on other people's terms. And this is one of the things that Dhimma did, with all the political disabilities and the civil disabilities that were also there. But these groups were expected to be different, and they were expected to magnify that difference and to cultivate their own theology. And when they engaged with others in that society, they engaged in terms of their difference, and that made for honest discourse. And it also allowed them to flourish. And I believe that in pluralistic America, which has become polarized America, black and white, in which the polarization is dangerous for us and potentially very violent, we have to be really careful about this. That on the left and on the right as well, we have universals, be they true or false, be they beautiful or ugly, be they ones that you agree with or not, that nullify each other. And we do not speak to each other on equal terms. We don't even like each other. And therefore, the polarization grows and grows, and when that happens, it can easily be exploited, and it can be used by other interests. Tonight, we want to talk about good and evil, and I want to give my presentation and then we'll break, and then we have the honor of having my beloved friend and mentor, Dr. Jackson, here. But tonight we want to talk about good and evil. And again, I would like to talk about this in a way which I hope shows the richness of the tradition. Dr. Jackson, in his book, looks at this primarily from the standpoint of theology. And I will mention some of the theological points that he has in his book. But what I want to show is that you can also, within the tradition, take a broader approach, which may be more useful for us today. Good and evil is closely connected in the history of religious thought to free will and also to the doctrine of divine omnipotence. In Islam, usually they come under that heading. And these are extremely important topics for all religions throughout history, no matter what they are. But in the history of the monotheisms, it is extremely important. And in fact, some great thinkers and religious people have said that this is the pitfall of the monotheisms. This is the biggest challenge that they face. What do you do with good and evil in a world of a wise and omnipotent God? Do we have free will? Do we not? We live in a world of opposites, a world that is composite, a world in which beauty and ugliness are mixed, good and evil are mixed. We are surrounded by all these contraries and opposites. And among the starkest of these, and the most controversial of these, is, of course, good and evil. And when we refer to good, interesting in our tradition, we tend to refer to the good as the beautiful. And we refer to the evil as the ugly. We won't go into that. There are reasons for that. But Muslims always preferred that aesthetic framing of the question. And I think one of the reasons for that is because it allows us to speak about good and evil in terms of what is volitional, what is a product of the human will, like the evil that we do as human beings, or the good that we do. And it also allows us to speak about this in terms of the non-volitional, if you will, evils or harms, like birth defects, like plagues and starvation, violent storms and tidal waves and things like that. So all of that comes under that heading. And we, the human beings who live in that world of opposites, we are the conjunction of opposites. We are composite beings. We are creatures of contradiction. We are potential agents of good, and we are also potential agents of evil. All the plants and animals that surround us in this world and in Islamic belief, as in traditional Judaic and Christian belief, the angelic world of the unseen, all of the inhabitants of those worlds, they have defined stations. They have what is called maqamun ma'lum. They have a well-known station. A dog is a dog, a cat is a cat, a horse is a horse. A species of a dog is always like that species. A species of a cat is like that species. They are never more or less than they ought to be. They fit into God's creation like that. But then we come to us, and we are the ones who have no known station. We can go to the highest of the high. In fact, we can be above the angels. And human perfection is what our religion has its sight on. And we can also fall to the lowest of the low. And each of us has to discover and has to seek and to claim his or her maqam, his or her station. However, in this, the human being is rooted in good. We believe, and in fact, many Oriental Christians and the Judaic tradition, according to my understanding of them, they also affirm this. Original sin is very much an Augustinian Western doctrine. But in our tradition, the human being is essentially good. He or she is rooted in good. And that's something that's very important. The Quran says, for example, by the human soul and what made it perfectly balanced, inspiring it with the knowledge it has of depravity and uprightness, surely that one shall succeed, that person shall succeed who purifies the soul, and that person shall fail who conceals its goodness, who covers over its goodness in wrong. In another verse, the Quran says, certainly we, God, have created the human being in the best of molds. Then we reduce him to the lowest of the low. Because of our contradictions, our instinctive goodness, our fundamental goodness, but our implicit potential for evil, human beings are weak. And in fact, in our concept of oppression, dhulm is essentially putting things in the wrong place. And the human being is zalim li nafsihi, is an oppressor to himself or herself until they get things in the right place. And that's